That's the thing is like taking governance seriously is something because like there's a lot of systems that use say Nakamoto consensus or whatever else, and there's a lot of things that Dash actually takes it serious with the legal things. And
Right.
let me check on YouTube, make sure because YouTube's the slow one. See if this one's working. And we appear to be live. Hey everyone, we're live. We have another fantastic episode. Let's hit the intro graphic and get right into this. And hey everyone, I have the fantastic pleasure of chatting with Dr. Darren Tapp, good friend of mine here on the
Hello.
Dash podcast. How's it going, Darren?
It's going well. Going well.
All right. So, for those who are unfamiliar with you, I think that's a crying shame because you're one of the treasures in the Dash ecosystem. But so you're a blockchain researcher with Arizona State University. Now,
Yeah.
are you still also teaching the courses there, or is that like a temporary thing?
Not right now. There was a plan to launch the blockchain course again in March, but I'm not sure what happened to that.
Yeah. So I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of issues surrounding virus, economic collapse, whatever else you want to have. I mean, it's a little bit of a crazy time anyway. But
Yeah. And it doesn't run every semester. It just runs when it's needed, when there's enough students that want it.
yeah, so first off, you've been involved in an election recently, and it's not a government election. So you want to tell
That's
us
right.
about that a little bit?
So there are at least two trusts in the Dash ecosystem. And one is called the Dash Trust Protectors. And the Dash Trust Protectors, they serve as kind of a stopgap or kind of a check on the Dash core group. And so I ran on a very conservative platform. Just make sure Dash handles payments and handles payments well, right? Nothing fancy. I mean, nothing beyond what they're already trying to do. And so, yeah, I was able to. There were 6 winners, and I was one of them. So that was great.
That's great. One of 6. And so, what is your what do you expect your actual role to be in this whole thing?
I think we should meet once a month at least, if not more. I'm still going through the onboarding process, so after I get through that, I'll have a better idea of what we're gonna do, all that. But I imagine there'll be maybe some conversation with Ryan. I mean, I was doing this informally anyway, but just what we see, how it's going. What the timeline is, stuff like that. So just keep abreast on it, and I'll be coming from the technical side. So if I see something that could be improved or could be brought in later or put on the roadmap, I'll definitely be keeping my eye out for that.
Yeah, so for those unfamiliar with the way the trust system works, essentially it's a legal entity that, among other things, but mainly owns and controls Dash Core Group, which is the main development arm behind the Dash ecosystem. And so it's basically like the real world entity that's still controlled by the, quote, not real world. It is very real. The Mastodon network. It's still controlled by that. But it's basically the real thing that stops people from taking the website rogue or the GitHub or whatever, and allows a little bit more granular control and stuff like you can actually remove someone like, say, the CEO of the core team, Ryan, if it were to come to that. But basically just like an extra security level. And as far as I know, this stuff hasn't been done before. So yeah, go ahead on that.
Well, it's modeling more or less traditional corporate structures. So Dash Core Group, it's basically a consulting company that only has one client, the Dash network, and so that sets up a kind of a weird situation. Dash Core Group really can't be a for-profit company. That doesn't kind of make sense.
Yeah.
Certainly having a reserve makes sense, but what are they going to do with the profits? So So having a trust, since it's not just a normal profit-driven company, and even if it was a normal profit-driven company, they often have a board of directors. And the idea is that a board of directors, you can bring in people with several skill sets, and you can you can have like a broader perspective on advancing. This situation is not advancing a business, but it's advancing the project and advancing the advancing currency forward, or decentralized currency forward. So I think this is smart to have kind of that check and balance, because and any good organization, you want to avoid the hit by a bus factor, where if three of your major top people are in the same bus and it runs off a cliff or something, you want continuity. I mean, of course, we don't hope that happens, but if it does, you would want to be prepared for that.
Of course.
And so having a trust with a board, that helps provide for continuity. And I mean, I know we're in at least 2 countries, and I hope we could bring in more countries and get like kind of a diversified, geographically governance of Dash. So that's good. Also, I mean, I'm in the space. I want things to go well, and what they say: if you want things to go well, you got to do it yourself. So here I am.
That's the truth. Yeah, it's also a pretty radical experiment with governance, because, and I would say Bitcoin was kind of the same way, coming out the gate, being this thing that no one owns or controls, and then anyone running, a known or a mining node gets to participate in it. And of course, there's Nakamoto consensus, which is, maybe by today's standards, a slightly crude sort of a system for decision making, but still like something out there. So it
was the first of its type. It was the first that was be able to be decentralized, and you could have a certain amount of certainty that you agreed with everybody else.
Yeah, and
so it's something. It's really something.
Yeah, it's really something, and really something incredible. Now, the challenge, of course, is as it's like very loose based, it's hard to really come together as a single unit and decide things. So, for example, like, should we increase the block size? There was a lot of schism on that, and I think that it ended up being, turning into an actual chain split, and then another chain split and stuff. So
yeah, and so you're referring to Bitcoin on that.
Yes,
one. Yes.
And so now we move from that evolution. Now, I would say, like, I wouldn't even call it really an evolution, because then you have the sort of foundation model which I'm sure was attempted with Bitcoin. The Bitcoin Foundation was a thing.
Yeah.
But it wasn't.
I was a member. I am a member, I guess.
But as far as I know, it didn't really have like the teeth that it could have. It's still kind of, Bitcoin is outside of control, more or less.
Yeah. And they were mainly working to be political and lobby and things like that. So they didn't really get involved in governance of Bitcoin. They tried to interact with governments.
Yeah, it was a little bit of a different type of thing. Now, a lot of things have gone through the foundation aspect instead, like, say, the Litecoin Foundation, where Litecoin is kind of operated by anyone in any way, But then there's a foundation that has some money, not a lot, but that pays some developers or do some marketing grants or things like that. So it's still like a Bitcoin-like system with just like a little, basically a centrally owned cryptocurrency that on a technical level is still decentralized. And then sort of Zcash took something like that, or you could say Ethereum as well, with like the ICO, and then Zcash with the Founders Reward took that same sort of a model where you still have a technically decentralized cryptocurrency, but now you kind of concentrate the actual funds produced, not whatever you can raise, not whatever funds you can raise, but you actually concentrate the funds into, again, a centralized entity that runs this decentralized network. And
the Electric Coin Company. You gotta love that name, though.
Yeah, it is pretty cool. It's very hipster,
Yeah.
Like, Like, can you imagine if you had like a crypto shop, like the Free State Bitcoin shop or something with like ATMs in there and stuff? You just called that the Electric Coin Company, and just a bunch of people with handlebar mustaches in there and stuff. I mean, come on, it's very hipster.
It's great. It's a
Yeah,
great name.
and so then you get to the next level where you have the DAO, where Dash, as the first one that we know of, basically, anyone who has a certain unit, 1,000 units of Dash gets to participate, and then everything, all the funding is created from nothing essentially. It's part of it comes from the very coin issuance, and you can't really censor people from participating. You don't know who they are. You can't censor payments because as long as you get voted in, then the money just drops from the sky right to whoever got voted in. And but then there's still like some extra levels of that are still like, okay, who controls the main Dash GitHub repository? Who controls Dash.org, the main site? Who controls whatever other things that aren't in the just purely digital space, things that are actually in the meat space, as I call it, that they're because the DAO, you can't design the DAO and have it apply to, like, say, U.S. government law. Like, it just doesn't work. You can't just. So instead, you create a legal structure that goes on top of this that kind of goes back to that Electric Coin Company style thing, but is still completely owned and controlled by the digital world. And all that giant long ramble to basically say, this is still new. This is very new. People haven't really done this before. And so I'd expect there to be some bumps along the road, including what does a trust protector do? How do we know what our duties are? What happens if you have too few candidates and not enough are elected? What happens if you have people who are elected but don't show up to meetings and kind of don't do stuff? And then, like, how does that work there? Or can you compromise Dash through the trust protectors, even though, the actual voting and stuff is still good? So lots and lots of things to be figured out. Have you had what one would call your first day on the job yet?
No, I'm still onboarding. So there's some paperwork that needs to be filled out, and I'm still kind of waiting on that. So
yeah. So
I contacted Mark, which I believe he was a trust protector before, and so he'll be there for continuity.
Yeah, of course, everyone's thrilled by paperwork, but it's a part of life. Now, I obviously asked you on because I know you're a smart dude. I know you're great. You've been on the podcast before in different iterations, and of course, you're my local buddy. But in addition to all
both
of that,
in quarantine.
yes. And so but now today I saw you posted something on Reddit, which is pretty fascinating to me. You're talking about the velocity protocol and being cited in a paper. So first tell me, just really quick, what the velocity protocol is.
So the velocity protocol is a theoretical protocol that we simulated that basically with this network, you want to get the blocks out to the rest of the network as quick as possible. And so what velocity does is it breaks a block, which is just data, just basically bytes, into pieces, into pieces. And so, and the way, like, it might break it into 100 pieces, right? And the node that needs the block can just listen to all these pieces, and if they get 100 pieces, there's a very, very high chance that they'll be able to recreate the whole block. But if they can't, then if they get one more piece, then there's an extremely high chance, like a much more high chance that they can recreate the block. And this, because it's broken into pieces, you can actually ask 3 nodes or 7 nodes or any number of nodes for the block at the same time, and they can all send these pieces. And the velocity protocol that we wrote actually will use more bandwidth, but it's kind of like a fire hose. Like it's just sloshing the block into this node that doesn't have it, and so even though it uses more bandwidth, it actually propagates the block through the main part of the network much quicker.
Yeah, so basically what that means is you're able to scale on-chain cryptocurrency transactions a lot higher.
Yeah.
And so the question is, can you jump how high, right? So like how
Well,
high?
Well, we had this idea of the economic limit, and for Dash, it was coming out at around 250 megabytes per block. Now, that's great because that's around Visa level, but at the same time, with their same simulations, you wouldn't want to just do that tomorrow because our simulations were getting a 33% orphan rate at that level. And so I think this is encouraging for Dash because similar experiments on Bitcoin, or actually emulations done on Bitcoin Cash, when they got up to Visa level, they had a 50% orphan rate. And so with our simulations, we had a 33% orphan rate. That's still too high for production.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, so the
it's
current
encouraging, I think.
Yeah, like the current orphan rate for Dash is extremely low. It's like very rare that there's any orphans.
Maybe 0.1 and percent. And I mean, it can scale much more and not be much different. It's just basically depending on how the network's set up, you can get over certain limits where the orphan rate starts to become significant. So
Yeah, so essentially like Visa levels, kind of like this is where we're starting to get to.
yeah, I mean Visa level, but you would never want to really like. We'd still have work to do before we would ever put. I mean, I wouldn't. I mean, if I'm going to advertise or recommend to the Dash team, I would want some more things done before they went higher. But of course, if they needed to go to 4, we know that they can double their capacity right now, and they're not using their capacity they have right now. So so we're in good shape as far as that goes. And we know what to do in the intermediate stages too. So we don't have to go right to Visa.
Of course. And I mean, that's heartening that you already know you've kind of reached the end goal to a certain extent in a rough way. Maybe not a perfect way. Maybe it's not the way you'd like it to be. But at least if for some reason all other blockchains collapsed and the fiat system became so terrible that people were rushing to Dash and wanted to use it on Visa levels in the next few months, you'd be freaking out, I'm sure. Yeah. And then you'd be slapping together like, oh, this is how you implement velocity on Dash today. Let's get it. You ship the code, and then it's kind of working for a lot of people, for a lot of the world. Like it's not the way you want it. You have like delays. It's not the best user experience always, but at least it's like there. At least you're not like, And so, of course, Visa serves a giant chunk of the world and a giant chunk of payments. And so if you're just getting like, 5 times Bitcoin's current capacity, it's like you just handle that with ease, right? And so like Bitcoin is being used. It's a pretty majorly being used cryptocurrency right now, as far as like 2 to 400,000 transactions per day. It's not like mass market by any levels, but it's still like big enough. So if you're reliably doing over 1 million payments per day, like actually people paying for things, like serious transactions, not just like dust and things like that. Which, by the way, I did see there was this paper that was cited recently that I believe they looked into transactions on XRP, on EOS, and there was another one that was another like high throughput kind of blockchain, and they found that, was it like 96% of, I mean, obviously there's different depending on those. Oh yeah, and Tezos. And there's like 96% or more, depending on the network, of those transactions were like garbage, like not real, what they call not real transactions. And so in the case of like XRP, it was to not move volume. So essentially it was just not actually transfer value. So just fake transactions, kind of.
Yeah, I don't know why that happens, but that's what. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised about that either.
And I believe with EOS, it was all in relation to the airdrop, like as in the ERC20 EOS. Remember, it was on ERC20 first, and then they did their main thing. So it was all related to basically claiming those tokens and stuff, or something. Again, I didn't read the paper through. I saw bits of it, and then Tezos was something like 60 or 80% just to run its governance system. Like the transactions were just running the governance system, but it wasn't actually doing anything else. So basically, well, when I'm talking about like processing millions of transactions, things like when you have Bitcoin SV doing, hundreds of thousands of transactions a day, and it's mostly Weather SV, like the weather app, and then some other like basic small data kind of app, and it's almost nothing like real, what I would call. It's a very different picture. So it's not like, I think I can do 10,000 a second, and okay, well, let's work on sustainable and fantastic payments,
Right.
And so, yeah. So you said that
and that's what Dash is doing. So
you said velocity is. So wait, before we talk about the citation, how, and this is just regular old transactions. This has nothing to do with ChainLocks and InstantSend as well, correct?
Yeah, so we published paper before ChainLocks and InstantSend, but with the upgrades using BLS signatures, I don't think that's going to be much of an issue. I think that you're going to run into scaling limits before you run into InstantSend scaling with the new structure.
Yeah, after the problems were solved.
Yeah, because I mean it's just the BLS signatures just work a lot easier, and so there were technological improvements that made me not worried about InstantSend at scale, which is what we're going to have to do now, or the Dash group is going to have to do. I would imagine. I hope the customers come, and then I'm also ChainLocks. That's kind of done after the block propagation. So the thing about this block propagation, it's all hands on deck when the block's getting out there, and then so you need your nodes to be a certain power to take care of that. But any other time, you've got a lot of resources that you can use for the InstantSend, you can use for the ChainLocks, all that stuff. There is a problem with nodes being able to accept transactions quick enough, and verifying transactions involves a hash, and that can, if you scale that up, it can use the processor a bit. So if you got like a bunch of transactions all at once, and without a block coming out, it probably would use a processor to check all those, and when you want to scale, you would need to check them in parallel. And like we were assuming quad core computers, so you usually have 8 threads on there, and so you can, if you're doing them in parallel, you can do basically 8 times as much. So we know what we need to do to make it work. It's just you need some other things. It's not just like the propagation protocol, but you need some efficiencies in the code, because Satoshi's code base was kind of just enough to get it out the door.
Yeah.
Enough for it was a dang good proof of concept, but that's more or less what it was.
Yeah, and I think people forget that about, especially when we start talking about, I don't want to bring up too much SV stuff, but especially when you start talking about conversations about, the original protocol, lock it in, it was all good enough as it was. And this is the value of crypto, of Bitcoin, comes from its inability to change, or the fact that it doesn't change or something. And, I ain't that technical, but I do understand enough that code is a living thing, that you have to keep building on it and improving on it, or it just becomes stale. I mean, it's like some things might be slightly evergreen, but it's like there's a reason we progress beyond floppy disks and things like that. And so Satoshi, of course, led the groundwork for some of the most amazing innovation that the human race has ever seen. Maybe I'm being hyperbolic, I don't know, but it seems pretty cool to me. But it started that stuff, and then you got to kind of, build on it, just like the basic blockchain transaction. So like the basic, you swipe a card, it gets recognized right away, but then it takes like a week or so to like settle, and then you can do a chargeback and things like that. Now you kind of move that to, you broadcast a Bitcoin transaction, it shows up right away, and then within 10 or 20 minutes or so, it's like locked in, it's settled. And that's a great improvement. And then now you start moving that with Dash, where, oh, guess what? Under 2 seconds on average, it's locked in permanently. Like you cannot double spend it. And then within 2.5 minutes, it's absolutely permanent. It's like chain locked in stone. And it's like when you have that, and then you start trying to scale that, it's like now we're having multiple innovations on top of Satoshi's original vision to just make that turn, dash Satoshi's vision. I bet that'll annoy some people. But yeah, it's like locking it in and advancing that. So you're talking about the citation.
Right.
Yeah, tell me about that a little bit.
Well, I'll first go kind of what would go like, so I'm a mathematician, and my thesis was a few, like 4 chapters, 5 chapters, something. And one of those chapters actually published in the journals, basically. I took one chapter, made a condensed version of it. It showed up in the Journal of Pure and Applied Algebra. So great. And it made me feel a little weird when I did that, because it took a while before it actually showed up in the journal. Like it was a year or two. And then once it was there, I felt like, it was a lot of work to come up with this. Once it was there, I was like, well, who's reading it? If nobody reads it, it doesn't do any good, really. Of course. That's kind of what I was thinking. And it kind of puts you down in the dumps to think about it that way. But from time to time, I would just check, and now there's Google Scholar, which makes it really easy to check. And so I think if I look now, I find 2 citations of that paper. One citation says, this is my math paper, says that Darren did this, and I can do this other thing that's better. And then I was like, oh man, like he one-upped me, or the other person one-upped me.
Now you got to one-up him.
But at the same time, I'm like, well, in my paper, I had to cite all these other people to say, hey, they did this, they did that, they did this, and I'm going to do this, right? So I was doing the same thing. So, and that's just how academics works, right? Is you got to, it's always a good idea to tell people what has been done before and show how your work is in context with other people's, and then do what the next thing is, or at least what your thing is, the new thing, right? So, I hadn't really checked this velocity paper, but I checked it just this week, and there was 5 citations. And so I clicked on one at random, and I was like, oh, this is so cool. I was like on Twitter, hey, this is so cool. Look, we're cited. And I didn't think much of it, but I left the paper up in a tab. Like, you have all these, like, browser with 300 tabs. So I'm like, okay, I got to reboot this computer. It's not hung yet, but it's always a good idea to kind of clear everything out and start fresh. So I was doing that, closing the tabs. I'm like, oh, what's that? This is an academic paper. Why is this here? I don't know. And I closed it. I read the title. I closed it. I'm like, wait, what was that title? And the title was like saying, we can do the block propagation the same way, but with less bandwidth, right? And that's what that's what it registered in my head as. And I'm like, what? And so I go back and like, yeah. So basically they think they can improve on at least the people that wrote this paper think they can improve on the velocity protocol. And one thing that's so nice about the open source community, the paper they wrote is it's in the Commons or whatever. It's in the Creative Commons. So when it's time to actually put this into production, or when we emulate it, we'll actually know more than what we knew when Nicole really is responsible for creating it. So we'll actually know more than what we knew when Nicole created it. So I think I mean it's almost made me kind of happy about this whole process, about how it works and all that. So
Yeah, that's fantastic.
So 5 citations. So I've got 5 papers to read, and then there's like a couple more that I want to read for other. Actually, there's another project I'm doing where I probably need to read another 7 or 8 pages, or papers, not pages.
Yeah.
But anyway,
so that's you got cited, and wouldn't it be great to then create further research that then cites those people that cited you?
Right. Yeah, I mean, it
builds
could
on
just keep
itself.
going. And that's how it works, yeah.
Yeah, and that's something that I think a lot of people in different fields don't quite understand as much. There's what I would call like scientific fields, like, computer science is one of them, that research builds on other research, et cetera, et cetera. A lot of times, for example, if you're a writer, like a creative writer or whatever, you have influences, or a musician. I mean, there is a little bit of an exception with some musicians, but you have influences. People you have to say, I got influenced by these people, but it's not like a direct citation, not always, unless it's kind of more like a voluntary thing. Like you say that because it's not the work isn't like scientific. It's creative, and so I mean, it's funny because there's the same sort of a thing with martial arts technique, where someone has like an art and they do this technique this way. And then someone else adds a thing to it. What if you did it this way? Whoa, and then that all works. And then someone builds off of that. And then that's why they have lineages as far as in old school martial arts, instructor lineage. This is my instructor, and I was this guy's instructor. And like you kind of trace the lineage, and then you can kind of see the evolution of the technique by building on top of each other. So it's sort of the same sort of a thing here. And it does make me feel a lot better about the world. Now, this is where it does something like Dash, I would argue, diverges from something like, say, Litecoin, where Litecoin cites, but it mostly does what was been done before, and that's it. Like, I don't know how many people, I'm sure there's a lot of people who, for example, a lot of coins have used the script mining algorithm that Litecoin uses, and there have been Litecoin code base forks, but not really. There's not a lot of like citations on that stuff because there just isn't that much building on top of that. And on the other hand, you have things like, say, Bitcoin Unlimited and all the scaling research they've done and how that's being used in Bitcoin SV or Bitcoin Cash or whatever. And then, of course, that's informing your work. And then hopefully we start to see your work start being folded back in to that whole pool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that's real. I mean, we definitely looked at their research. We try to read everything they wrote. Peter Reason, and then the Graphene crew, which is out of UMass. I went and talked to them. We wrote a paper together. I was brought on as co-author. Anyway, so and it just builds on itself. So, there's. Just in the cryptocurrency thing, people say Satoshi, right? And they kind of elevate them to like almost God, right? Or something like some type of deity. Name that God's a bit strong. A deity or something, right?
A mythical figure.
And academics, it doesn't work like that. There's like, I would say somebody that did this work that called themselves Satoshi, whether it was a person or group or whatever, I would say that's something that deserves a lot of respect.
Yes.
And you should just like look at that and say, wow, you did something that hadn't been done before, at least it wasn't public, whatever. And I really respect that, right? But with science, with academics, it's never going to be the best. There's always going to be something else that can be done, So, I mean, people are building off of that work. And people like Graphene, I would say that's kind of a little bit side. It's not like vertical on top of it. It's like, here's another thing we can bring in that's going to help, right? Same thing with velocity. Here's another thing we could bring in that's going to help, right? It's not really, it's just going to help Satoshi's paper do its thing. And so it's not. So yes, Satoshi's paper deserves a lot of respect, and academic community, I hope they recognize that. But it's a very broad academic community, and there's a lot of people doing a lot of work, and a lot of the work, most of the work, deserves respect as well. And if you studied physics, there's Einstein. He did something amazing, right? But there's tons of people that did all kinds of stuff that you might not know about. But it is, just because it's not some big all-encompassing theory doesn't mean that it's not important. And like if you did study physics, I think there's a subject that people don't really pay attention to, at least in the popular world, and that's called solid state physics. Mm-hmm. And when I was undergrad, I was getting a physics degree, and I was thinking that was the most fertile ground was solid state physics, because that's where you're going to get your new materials, your all kind of fancy stuff, right? That's going to apply where popular, what's sexy and what people like is particle physics.
Yeah.
And I would say that the applications are much further away from particle physics than solid state physics. So there's like a lot of people doing grunt work that deserves respect, and maybe not the same respect, but it deserves respect too. So it's just all people doing all kinds of different work. And some people are building on top of Satoshi, like doing things on top of, like ChainLocks is on top of the Nakamoto, right? And it's, and that's, so now, and this is whole Newton quote, stand on the shoulder of giants.
Yeah,
right?
That is true. And it works in a lot of other ways in life. It's just not as codified, so to speak. Because, like, for example, I'm just looking around me right now. I'm using this microphone because Michael W. Dean of the Freedom Fiends recommended this as the absolute best mic, USB mic, before you start getting into a whole audio interface and a whole bunch of other stuff that, let's be honest, I'm not going to do, because this is the C. And it sounds good enough, right? It works.
Right.
And now this whole lighting setup and stuff that I have, whether it's this little light in the corner here, this light here that has, I put what do they call it? Baking parchment paper over to diffuse the light here, and then a big old softbox over there. All that was like I watched random YouTubers to learn about that kind of stuff. And then this whole setup using OBS, Open Broadcast Software, was my co-host Kodak's idea, and he kind of showed me how to do that. And then I kind of looked up a bunch of Twitch, like gaming streamers on like overlay type stuff, and then I used GIMP, again open source software again, to create hand create the overlays, the images that stick in and have our nameplates on them. And then I use some other Twitch site to just auto generate the buttons for the donate and the subscribe down here. And then of course I pulled the dash from the brand assets part of the dash site. I pulled the background. So everything I'm doing here, and of course, this whole podcast got inspired when I went on Free Talk Live to talk about Dash many years ago, and Brian, Mastermind, wanted, hey, let's just do a show like that every week. And then of course it was myself and Mark Mason doing it for a while, and then now it keeps here. So everywhere we're and even like my shirt, 1984 is not an instruction manual. It's by WikiLeaks, and they of course reference the work of 1984 against totalitarianism. It's funny, like, but all you'd see if you see this show is just, here it is. There's no academic process written down as far as every little bit that comes, how I figure out 3-point lighting, how I figure out how to stream, jumping around the live chat, those kinds of things. Like, that's the beauty of academia and science, is that you actually have the trail. You can just build on that. And our mutual buddy, I guess, Unchained, who kind of spearheaded the Dash Investment Foundation. As far as I know, he spearheaded this. I know he's a big advocate for it. Moving to GitHub, putting all their stuff, all their discussions, not all of them, not the NDA stuff, but all their stuff onto GitHub, to where now you have discussions you can build on top of each other, and like the whole community can kind of go and contribute and stuff like that. And he wants me to put everything onto GitHub, and I have to figure out what I have to do in my own life that would work. But for example, Discover Dash would be fantastic to have its merchant repository on GitHub, where anyone could come in and just say, "Oh, pull request, take this one down. This doesn't accept anymore here," and then have a few people just sort of managing those. And I really want to do that.
My company accepts it. Please put me up, and they can just do it. Yeah.
Yeah, and just it's kind of an off-topic ramble, but just off the top of your head, do you know of a way that could like sync to a WordPress database, or would it have to then be manually entered into WordPress? Like just put in stuff on GitHub and then it just you can auto push it to like a WordPress database.
I know people do that. I use Nicola. I use Nicola, which is some Python thing that I type up my thing in restructured text, right? So there, I type, and then I actually use Git. I don't use GitHub. I don't want to really make what I'm doing public. I mean, I do make everything public. It's just that I don't want to have everybody see what kind of behind the scenes what's going on. And I'm a horrible speller. I don't want people to see that. Or I want to hide that. But I have Git is open software, so you can use that. And I actually I use a Git repository on the Keybase.
Yeah.
Right. So they had those private repositories. They say they're encrypted. I think they are. And then I just pull it to the server, and that's the update. Like I update it, and I can stage it from my local machine, and then when I like it, I just pull it to the server, and then it's live on the website.
Yeah. So that's something which, by the way, if anyone out there is listening and knows a way to do this, I would happily help in any way I can. And I know, what was actually Discover Dash is sort of on a holding pattern until, because everything was done manually, and it's kind of on a holding pattern until there's a way to create a decentralized, like a Dash platform dApp around it. But in the meantime, like if someone can figure out how to do that with just like a WordPress site, which is what it is right now, that would be fantastic. Which, by the way, yeah, keep going.
Yeah, one reason I use this Nicola is because WordPress uses a database, and then so kind of how everything's stored in the database makes it kind of confusing. So this is what I'm using. They call it a flat. It's a flat website. You don't have all that extra stuff. So I think it's easier to collaborate with other software than WordPress, unless you're just everybody's logging in through the front end, and you can't have random people do that. You can have random people look at GitHub and make a pull request, but you can't have random people edit what's live.
Well, that would be an interesting thing to do, is to make a global crypto merchant directory that's not just Dash, but,
right?
And then have like a few different people involved. Make sure it's like it's not one group kind of controls, because I know like the Bitcoin Cash map is pretty out of date just from knowing around here. And again, and as I've said, every single time I mention this, it sounds like I'm throwing shade, but it just over the last 2 years or year, I think 80% of their listings here in New Hampshire are not accurate anymore, but they were accurate when they were submitted. So it's just there's turnover, but just no one did anything about it. And so I think that would really help. And that's kind of what, if you think about something like Yelp is you got that network effect of people submitting things. The problem is Yelp is a company, and they have all this bandwidth to have people combing through the reviews and like things like that. And it'd be better to have like a Git kind of a situation. I do have a couple questions in the live chat. So before that, if you're watching, if you have not subscribed yet, please do so, because this is where it happens every week. And I know when I migrated YouTube channels, some people were like, "Hey, are you still doing that podcast?" I'm like, "Yeah, it's just on a different channel." So if you're watching this now, subscribe on whatever. YouTube is, YouTube's Digital Cash Network is the big one, but this is also going out to other networks as well. And of course, there's the Cointree if you want to donate. Now, Hillary S asks, does Darren thinks of, or He says, does Darren think some of the Bitcoin Cash token work is worth doing for Dash? Will it get a wider use case for the network? So like SLP tokens and such.
I have trouble thinking of it as a high priority. My understanding is like the Omni layer on Bitcoin. I imagine it can be brought over to Dash, and you can have your tokens like that. But I'm a little bit hesitant to, and it's an open source project. So if somebody does that, it's an open source, right?
Yeah.
You can do that. Right? No, I'm not saying don't. I'm just saying, as far as like resources of Dash core group, resources of the network, I don't know if that's actually the best allocation of resources.
Yeah.
But if somebody did it, I mean, the culture when I worked at Dash, it really is a FOSS project. It's a free and open source project. So the culture is if you did that, you did that, and that's it. I think the useful tokens are far and few between.
Yeah.
I went on Ravencoin and made my own little tokens and just for fun, kind of, and they encourage people to do that. Just reserve your name or whatever, right? And I think that's all fine and dandy, and that's harmless. Like people make tokens what leaves people with a bad taste in their mouth is when they make these tokens and they're supposed to be equity or bonds or something, and it's kind of weird. Like, how do you enforce it and all that? Like, if there's some off-chain enforcement that needs to be happening, like that EOS token you mentioned, it literally said this is not worth it. This is not, you don't get anything in exchange for this. Now, I think they did actually get it on the EOS platform, but legally they couldn't say that you get anything in response. It just is kind of. I'm not going to be that excited about tokens until there are tokens that can be traded and are considered securities by the SEC and they're properly registered and all of that. I mean, from the U.S. perspective, right? So until that happens, I'm not going to be too. I mean, technically, even Tether, if it's an obligation that somebody pays you $1, then it's a security.
Yeah, of course.
So, and if it's not an obligation that somebody's paid you $1,
it's not worth $1. Exactly, it's fiat.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, like, and I mean, there's a DAI which I think doesn't have a central entity that's paying you that $1. So that's probably better legally, but then the supply of them is not right to probably meet demand and all that.
Yeah,
and also they're on the Ethereum platform, which is very bloated. And if tokens were bought over to the Dash network, then that's going to lead to some bloat. And I think people that are scaling Dash, should just take the traffic as it comes. They shouldn't make a moral. I mean, the Bitcoin people did that early on. Bitcoin developers, they try to make a moral judgment about what traffic's right and wrong and all that.
Yeah.
I think that's not the way to go. Just there's traffic. If there's traffic, we better have a network that can handle it. And then we can adjust the fee that's right. Now, Dash is mostly committed to keeping the fee around a penny, not much different than a penny. But like if we had to raise it from 1/10 of a penny now to a penny, just to kind of start to limit some of this traffic, that's about the most I would ever want to do.
Yeah. We're talking
people
about
making more judgment about traffic put a really bad taste in my mouth. So I certainly don't want to do that.
Now, one thing that's interesting. So I did remember Ryan said in an interview like a year ago, he's talking about platform. He said that Dash platform could enable what he called SLP tokens on steroids. And first off, I like that terminology, but what are the kinds of things you think that platform tokens, which are not a priority, we've already gone over that, but when they come around that can do that, say SLP tokens on Bitcoin Cash can't?
I think if when the platform comes, I think that there can be things brought in with the name service that would make things a lot easier.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Like we could maybe have tokens with unique names or well-defined names. With the SLP tokens, I think it's really hard. People could spoof tokens, is my understanding. So I think if Dash had tokens, once the platform's there, I think they can be done in a less spoof way, in a way that's harder to spoof.
Yeah. Now, this is kind of like in the past now a little bit, but the all-encompassing concept of the Bitcoin Cash dev tax. I got a question about that. Basically, like, what do you think about that? So, first off, let's just talk about what the status of that was. Basically, it was an attempt to requisition a portion of the Bitcoin Cash block reward and put it towards the development of the protocol by a centralized entity, right? Bitcoin ABC. And there's a lot of different details in it. Switch basically, and there's sort of a threat or an idea to threaten to orphan blocks of miners that don't kind of go along with this. And then there was like a split. And then there was this big argument. People thought there was going to be a chain split, and they sort of backed off and then just started fundraising. First off, I don't know if you kept up on that. Has the idea sort of gone away, or is there like progress on it, or is it still kind of in the back?
So, I'm going to try to explain this without taking a position on it. So, my buddy Chris Pacia thinks that it's a good idea. And he thinks it's a good idea because, he's a software developer and he understands in order to get things done, you need to, forego doing other things. And so, like, if you're working on Bitcoin Cash, he works for OpenBazaar. He's a paid developer there. But he does work for Bitcoin Cash. I mean, has had some pull requests and he has done some code and he makes I think it's Bitcoin D or BCHD, an implementation. I think he just made that on his own because he wanted to. And so, but I mean, I respect his opinion, and his opinion is that, developers should be paid. And I've been supporting Dash, and I mean, I like the Dash project, and the developers there are paid. So, I can't really argue against it.
Yeah, of course.
So Dash has the ability to pay their developers. So when Bitcoin Cash brought up the idea, well, hey, we should pay our developers, it was kind of like fun. It was kind of brought it out that, oh, wait, maybe this is a natural progression, and Dash has like already solved this and already been through it. Like, we don't have to have this debate that's going on over in the Bitcoin Cash community now, because we just vote and we accept the vote. So we have to because it's enforced. But so then the Bitcoin Unlimited team took a strong position against this. They call it a tax. And then somebody, I'm not sure who, wrote a node implementation that's called, I think it's called BCHN, Bitcoin Cash Node, or something like that. Really simple name. And so the Bitcoin Cash Node has all the hard fork things except this, I'm going to call it dev tax. And I think that's a loaded term, but oh well. Okay. And so my understanding is that a majority of the people are on that side. And yes, you're right, Joel. The original proposal was some of the block reward would be devoted to the developers, and it was going to go through a central agency. And I know Dash has its agency, but like there's a vote every month. It could always go somewhere else or not go there.
Yeah.
Or it can be changed if it needs to be. It's not that central agency is not like built into the code. You know what I mean? So so it's just going to go. I mean, the proposal was to go through a Hong Kong corporation. It wasn't even clear. Like, I don't even know. They didn't even say which one, if it was even registered yet. But yeah, so my understanding is that there's enough people on the, let's call it Bitcoin Cash node side, that it probably won't go through. And the original proposal was to orphan any blocks that didn't do it. But you need over 50% of it to do that. I actually got a little confused in all this and wrote a blog article on my blog.tapmath.com. And I felt kind of silly when I was done with it, because it just basically, if you're a miner, and I'm not, I don't mine Bitcoin Cash, but if you're a Bitcoin Cash miner and you just want to make a profit, after going through all the game theory, you should just go with the majority. Go with what everybody else goes with. So that's the only way to really make a profit. And that's really what Satoshi's paper was. So like, that's exactly what Satoshi's paper said. Anyway, so, but yeah, I think that will be quashed. And I don't necessarily think it's a bad idea to pay the developers. It's just kind of weird. How do you have this check and balance? And with Dash, I'm grateful that the check and balance isn't always a hard fork. We don't have to hard fork anything to have a check and balance. So, I mean, like, sometimes people have been upset that some proposals have gone through, and sometimes I've disagreed with proposals that kind of gotten dropped, like they should be paid and all that.
Yeah.
But when I take a step back and look about it, well, what's the result? And then maybe somebody was working for the network and then they had a very bad attitude when they weren't paid. And, it's like, well, maybe we were better off not having that person. Does that make sense?
Yeah, there's been a little bit of that. That's for sure. Speaking of Bitcoin ABC and all that, but let's go down not go down that rabbit hole.
Yeah, I mean, but and so it's just people. You can judge people based on how they act. So
yeah, and that's one thing that I think is when you're building systems, which is literally what we're doing here, right? We're building systems, and sometimes you don't get the results you want. And first off, if you consistently don't get the results you want, there's always variability, right? But if you consistently don't get the results you want, there's something wrong with the system. Something needs to be tweaked. And in science, there isn't like right and wrong, really. There's just tweaks. Like, this happens, and this is this is the result of this equation. And so when I think about the Dash Treasury system, sometimes there are just like mean or stupid people that act and stuff happens the wrong way. Okay, but I think that's the wrong way of looking at it. The right way of looking at it is, given the incentives, this outcome was produced, and first we have to decide if is that outcome desirable or not. If it's undesirable, it's like you don't blame the fuel that you put in the car for like making it run poorly necessarily. Like, sometimes you have to have the right fuel, but basically if that's what you got to make sure the motor runs correctly on that. And so, like, every time I see low voter participation or people not voting on voting on stuff that's not well defined or not appreciating certain things, I start thinking in my system building kind of mind of what needs to be tweaked with the system that gives the better outcome. And so, for example, one thing that Ryan is talking about, which hopefully he'll be on 2 weeks from today to talk about this exact thing, which hopefully will be put forward by then, on tweaking the block allocation, is he wants to do it so that any unspent coins get distributed to the masternodes. And therefore, in, like, say, a flexible treasury, like, you can spend up to 20%, but then that comes out of your paycheck as a masternode kind of thing. And so when you have that kind of a system, which, by the way, that system already kind of exists in that any Dash that's not created makes whatever you have more valuable. But it's not an instant. It doesn't enter the lizard brain right there. And so maybe as an economic system it works, but as far as a behavior shaping system, I don't think it shapes voting behavior right now. But if you actually, instead of not taking that supply, not creating that supply, if you take it and give it back to the people who've like voted, it's a more real example of this kind of principle, like in the real world, and it kind of makes people, it might change voting behavior, and that just might be
it
it.
probably will, yeah.
Yeah, and I'd definitely like to see that kind of pop up. Now, I did have another question, which is not very relevant to Dash directly, but can you convince your buddy Chris to accept Dash at Open Bazaar? Last time he was asked, and he just said, just use the integrated shapeshift. So I don't know.
Well,
I don't use Open. Do you use Open Bazaar?
I haven't, but I might. Let's see. So when I asked him, which was a couple years ago, he said that it's open source code, and you can make the change. And in a very real sense, that's a good answer. I mean, I'm just glad that it wasn't a Bitcoin maximalist project. Like, it was actually brought something in that was something else. Like, it will work on Bitcoin Cash now, right?
Yeah.
And so I got thinking about what Chris said. And I think actually it wouldn't be that hard to just take their open code, and it is, and just turn it over to Dash. Now, they use the multi-sig, and Dash has it. It's brought into Dash. So I mean, it's just not used. It is used in Dash. I've seen multi-sig in Dash. So I think it's almost would be turnkey. So I'm pretty sure if I ask Chris again, he's going to give me a similar answer.
Yeah.
So maybe that's maybe there should be a proposal. Like, I'm pretty excited about the what is it called, the desktop wallet that's Electron Cash. What is it called? The
Dash
other one.
Electrum.
Dash Electrum. Yes. Yeah.
So I was
pretty excited about that.
I'm using that one, and I have not been able to make it work with private send. And some friend who interviewed me, he also had issues. And supposedly those bugs that I discovered or that I drew light to, whatever, are supposedly going to be fixed in the next build, which is in like a few days or a week or something. So hopefully that's all good, because I always mix from the core wallet. I always use that. You just always be mixing, right? But it would be great to be able to do it on mobile. And just when I see like Bitcoin Cash folks using Electron Cash and mixing that way, and it brings joy to my heart to see people move into the next level of privacy and things like that. But then when you start comparing apples to apples, it's not an apples to apples comparison with private send being like a couple rounds versus 16 rounds, and like just all the different things that private send has over it right now. Now, I have not looked into Cash Fusion that much, but whatever. Basically, it'd be great to actually have increased use of privacy. Now, that reminds me, last question for me on that. You're talking about scaling, and when you're talking about tokens and how that might put an undue burden on the network, that could, we have to be prepared that it'll throw more transactions on the network and stuff.
And we have to adjust to it. I'm not saying we should actively try to prevent it.
Yeah, so when you're talking about how does private send impact scaling if it were used on a large scale, like not under 1% of transactions, but somewhere around 10%? And because from my understanding, private send transactions also are zero fee, like the mixing ones are zero fee. And like, how does that impact? Like, does that come into play really or not really?
If 10% of the kilobytes submitted to the network were private send, and in a mature system, that doesn't sound too far off. I'd imagine. I mean, I don't think it's going to be 50%. I think a lot of people aren't going to use it. But let's say there's 10% of the actual kilobytes that are submitted. Then you need like an extra 11% bigger block to handle that than what you would need otherwise with the same number of transactions. Like with Ryan's numbers, he always takes out the private send ones.
Yeah.
With the transactions. So we need 11% more block for the same number of transactions if we exclude the private send. So that's it. We need 11% more.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like that much. And it's also, I mean, I have to wonder, because like right now, private send is a very fringe application. But I don't think that's a good idea, not just because, oh, we're all privacy, all the good stuff. Yeah, that too. But also from the perspective of when you shop online, like through Amazon or whatever, there's some serious, like people, like, do you really want to go to go buy a coffee somewhere? And then whoever is behind this counter just runs your address and then sees if they can correlate with some other transactions, watches it, and sees if they can find out how much you are. If you have a lot of money, then they mug you on the way home next time or something. Like there's some increased risks that maybe cards don't have. Cards have their own set of risks, of course, but like, you know, the paper just like if someone, you pull out a giant wad of hundreds and then you like pull out like a 5 there to pay for your coffee, someone's gonna be like, I'm gonna beat that guy up on his way home. He's got all his money. So I hope that in the future, like all retail payments, or most of them, will be private send or something. We'll have some kind of advanced privacy bit, which already the username to username thing will make it a lot better. But you know, I don't know what you think about that.
Well, I'll just tell you my use case for Dash. Right? You're talking about your use case. My use case for Dash is, well, I'm not going to worry about the coffee guy thinking I have a whole bunch of money because I'm going to pay with my phone, and I'm only going to keep a small amount on my phone, right? So that right there, they would have trouble. You know, they have to go a few steps back, and they're not even sure if it's mine, right? If there's no private send, if I don't use private send, and if let's say I did want to take some money and put it into Coinbase, well. If I don't use private send and they're asking where the money came from, and that's what they're going to do, it's going to be a little bit easier to say, this is where it came from, right? I mean, I wouldn't lie to them. I'd tell them the same thing, no matter if I use private send or not. But I just think I'm going to have less problems with the bank and stuff if it wasn't so obfuscated. So.
Yeah,
so I think there's I think there needs to be room for both on chain. There needs to be. I mean, I'm glad you're enjoying private send. I think there's some improvements that can be made for private send. But there was some discussion of Mimblewimble, and do not do that.
That's
no. But if you want to bring over some improvements, maybe start reading about the Cash Fusion that's on the Bitcoin Cash. So, I believe if you read Cash Fusion, their paper, I believe it can be we can do private send in a way where the masternode doesn't know which output corresponds to which input. So, right now we trust that the masternodes aren't paying attention, aren't gonna,
mostly probably aren't.
Yeah, I mean, and we're trusting that they have a vested interest in the network working, so the private send works the way it's supposed to work, but. At the same time, if you could do some small little cryptographic thing for no real cost on your processors and stuff like that, why wouldn't you?
Yeah.
So that's one thing I think being brought in. I think Cash Fusion also might do a better job of keeping the amounts separate or something like that. But I would definitely be in favor of improving private send. But also at the same time, I'm glad that I'm given the choice if I want to use it or not. And pretty much anything when I'm interacting with the banking system, which I know you're doing the fiat free, so you don't need to worry about that, Joel. But when you're worrying about when you're interacting with the banking system, the easier it is to explain to them, the better off. The easier time they'll get you. That's the way it is.
Yeah, so that's a good time to probably drop in the Fiat Free Challenge plug. During the month of May, I'm encouraging everyone to do the hashtag Fiat Free Challenge. Buy everything you can with crypto. and in my case it's 100%, but in other cases, what if it's 20 or 30%? Because we could be facing some economic troubles in the future. We could be facing hyperinflation, although that's might be the more hyperbolic, again, hence hyper, right? The more hyperbolic kind of thing. But there will be a devaluation of the US dollar and other things. In case things go really bad, I want to make sure people at least aren't just hodling their Bitcoin on their Trezor and then just don't know what to do with it, if there's no paper to turn it into. Like, I want to try to encourage that. And by the way, the one thing that obviously there's a million different ways of doing that, and I'm making a video series on this channel, Digital Cash Network, on YouTube and on Library. I would encourage, there's one service that's really cool, which is Lamium, LAMIUM.io. It's basically purse.io except for bill pay. And no, they're not paying me to say this, but I'm excited because that was the last thing. I couldn't pay my electricity bill and stuff directly with Dash before. Now I can. I just upload my bill, pay for it in Dash, and then someone goes and pays it for me. And it's great. No ID, no nothing. I don't even have an account with Lamium. I just got to do it. So that's great. Fiat Free Challenge. So we're probably coming up towards the end of this thing. Darren, any other thoughts or any other research or work of yours that you want to point people in the direction of?
Well, I've been doing a lot of reading about interplanetary file systems. I'm really interested in how that's going to apply to what they're calling Web 3.0. And I think I've been kind of on a decentralization kick recently. I think that there might be good reason to just have everything decentralized. It costs some more resources, like with interplanetary file systems, you generally want to have more than one copy, so there's some redundancy, but at the same time, you get some resiliency in exchange for that. So that's valuable. And I was wondering if I can share my screen. Yes. Okay. And you were talking about okay, I'm going to share my entire screen.
Yep.
Allow. Okay. Boom. Boom. There. You see this? Okay, this is the total assets of the Federal Reserve. This was, okay, so you can see my pointer move, right? So this is the first that's a financial crisis in 07, 08. And you can see this is like the amount of money that they made. So they bought stuff, and their balance sheet is how much they bought. It went up from like $1 trillion to $2 trillion, right?
Yeah.
And that was like that. Okay. And then it goes up to $4 trillion because all of the stuff they did here didn't work. So they had to do some more, right? And then they were doing all this with the idea that they would unwind, that they would undo it. And you can see they kind of undid it right here. Started to, right? but they got a lot further to go if they're going to go back to where they were.
Yeah.
And then this is around September. The repo market started having trouble. That's the market where they do these repossession agreements. That's the banks will lend out their treasuries and get cash, and they have enough cash on hand and stuff like that. And the treasuries are collaterals for the loan. Okay, so they had repo problems. So then the Federal Reserve's balance sheet started growing right there, and then the COVID thing started, and you can see it took off. Yeah, and it took off, and you can almost see how it did the same thing that did there. So now it's going from 4 trillion to 6 trillion. Another thing, I don't know if I can find this.
DarrenTapp.com.
Let's see. Yeah, DarrenTapp.com. Let's see. Okay, yeah. Okay, so I made a bunch of links to stuff that I was interested in. So this is the national debt since March. And you can see just at the end of February, it was at 23.4 trillion. And it's now it's at 25.1, so it's over 1 trillion in just a couple months.
Yeah,
that's
crazy.
Yeah, generally, like people were talking about the current president, spending $1 trillion or having $1 trillion deficit in a year. So this is $1 trillion deficit in 2 months. And Bloomberg is reporting that it's probably going to be 3 trillion by the end of the quarter.
Yeah, so we're facing some crazy devaluation of the dollar, possibly.
Yeah, these numbers are so huge. Now, there's this counterintuitive thing, like I'm actually expressing a bit about a deflation right now, even with all this money floating around.
Mm-hmm.
But it's kind of like a rubber band. It like stretches, and so you worry about it stretching too much and breaking. So, you know, the economy is going to contract. People are going to get scared. They're going to want money, cash, and then once it starts to take off, all this money is going to be there, and you know, and then it's the velocity of the money that will cause that inflation. So,
yeah,
the price inflation you mentioned.
So it's probably a pretty good time to wrap this up. Going an hour 15. DarrenTapp.com takes you to your stuff.
Yeah,
including all your.
And then TappMath.com has my blog.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so TappMath.com for the blog. DarrenTapp.com for all your stuff. Does DarrenTapp.com have your scaling paper stuff, or is that both?
Yeah, it's got my publications. Yeah, it's got those. Yeah. Both the graphene and the velocity. Yeah.
Yeah, so you should definitely look into that stuff. And as always, if you enjoy this thing, don't forget to share it, like it, and subscribe. And there's a donation in the Cointree/the Desert Links. Now that's a project of Naomi Brockwell to just help content creators kind of monetize their stuff. And it has a little wall on there too, a message wall. So you leave your crypto donation address, and if you send a donation, you can also send a message that pops up on their public wall or whatever like that. So if you really want to tell me something, that's a great way of doing it. And so now it's time for the mythical thing called the after party, which is just hanging around like this, except a lot of us, and sometimes up into the wee hours of the morning. The other day I was there like last week or so until like 2:30 in the morning my time, and some people on the other side of the pond, I saw the sun coming up behind them. I'm like, you might want to get to bed now. So if you want a good time, the after party. And how you get there is you got to go to the Dash Talk Discord. We're doing it speakeasy style still, which is stay-e.com. And then you get in there, and then you just start asking around, hey, can I get the after party? Where's the after party? And if you want to ping me at the Desert Links, which is all over the screen, all over the place, then to get you in, then I can get you in. And yeah, that's just about it. So, Darren, do you think you're going to make it into the after party, or you got somewhere to be?
I can hang around for about 17 minutes, maybe. 20 minutes.
All right. So
something like that.
If you want to chat, get that super exposure into you got to ask all those burning questions that I might have ignored in the live chat, which hopefully not. That's where it is. So again, thanks everyone for watching. Remember to subscribe, and we'll see you in about 2 weeks, hopefully with Ryan Taylor, to give a lot of good stuff. So bye for now. See you then.